give me my bloody drugs.
Oh, Charlie, I have such complicated feelings for you, you little hobbit. Welcome to the Lost Explained episode guide, in which we are exploring and explaining Lost, episode by episode, mystery by mystery. Now, these videos are full of spoilerific information, so you have been warned. This time we are analysing the Charlie-centric episode The Moth, in which the heroin-addicted has-been rock star faces down his addiction, his ego, and his own inner darkness as he struggles for change, with a little bit of help from the island's resident agony aunt, John Locke. Elsewhere, we will see how his music career began, his Catholic roots, and the sibling rivalry he shares with his frontman brother Liam, which is a relationship that definitely was not inspired in any way, shape or form by real-life British rock star siblings. Let's get into it. The Moth is a very well-regarded episode by the fan base, and while I personally think it is unevenly written, it absolutely makes for a solid episode within the Lost canon that relies more heavily upon its central themes than previous episodes. And oh boy, is this one all about the metaphor and symbolism. It also provides a fairly promising start for Charlie, but we need to address several issues, specifically in the way the character himself is portrayed, and the lackluster nature of his flashbacks, as these will all create recurring problems going forward. Let's start with an overview of the character to get a sense of the man. Charlie is a devout Catholic and talented musician who hits the big time and becomes a world-famous rock star, then falls into the trappings of drug addiction, then finally becomes a washed-up has-been who cannot kick his habit, and spirals further and further down into desperation until he hits rock bottom. And then to add insult to injury, he crashes on a weird, mysterious island, where he finds the help that he needs to quit, and people who care about him without any caveats or agendas. He might not recapture his glory days as a rock god, but he instead finds his inner strength through friendship, companionship, and surrogate fatherhood, which leads him into becoming a better man. And this is what facilitates his choice to make the ultimate sacrifice in order to protect this new life. He spends so many years unable to save even himself, but soon he will have the constitution and the courage needed to save the lives of the ones he loves. That's Charlie's basic character arc in a nutshell, and it absolutely sounds good in theory, but the way his storylines are handled often land with a hollow, dramatic thud. His backstory can sometimes border on the dull, and Charlie quite frequently finds himself on the wrong side of being unlikable. I'm not unique in my reservations of the Charlie Pace character or his storylines. Lost embraces flaws and weaknesses. Our motley crew of castaways are a beautifully complicated bunch, and I wouldn't have it any other way. However, if I had to pick a character in the show who does annoy me, and whom I do struggle with from time to time, it's Charlie Pace. In part because of his somewhat fragile ego that makes him behave like a petulant child during some really quite serious situations, and also in part because of his clinginess to Claire, a pregnant woman whom he has only just really met but already behaves with a strange entitlement towards. But primarily I think my issues with the character actually lie in Dominic Monaghan's performance choices. I believe Charlie was initially intended to be a sort of amalgamation between two massive British exports from the 1990s, the rock band Oasis, of which the comparison speaks for itself, and the Danny Boyle movie Trainspotting, which followed the surreal lives of heroin addicts in Scotland. Charlie seems like a character who has crawled right out of that film. He is portrayed as being tragic, but also rather tragically funny at the same time, often designed to be a foil to those around him in any given scene. Someone who is supposed to be a little bit cowardly and a little bit pathetic, yet always teetering on the brink of darkness and self-destruction. I mean, what profession and skill set could be more useless in a survival situation than a one-hit wonder rock star? The scenario is funny just in premise alone, yet Charlie wants to be taken as seriously as the other survivors, and that makes him both needy for attention and over-eager to demonstrate that he has utility to the group. Sometimes Monaghan is too self-conscious in the role for my liking, and I can see the seams in his acting, and that takes me out of certain moments. He does a lot of what I deem to be look at me acting, which is often more about showboating than remaining true to the character he is playing. So the desperate and unflattering portrayal of a drug-addicted celebrity musician in freefall, looking for newfound purpose, suddenly becomes imbued with arrogance, posturing, and clowning around.
What?
So this may be a hot take, but to me, Dominic Monaghan is actually one of the weaker links in the early cast. I just don't always find him convincing in the role, especially when contrasted against some of the better actors on the show. Otherwise, I can handle the flaws and weaknesses of the character just fine. I think Charlie's drug problem is actually quite sensitively handled. Sure, it isn't saying anything particularly cutting edge or insightful other than,
drugs are bad. You shouldn't do drugs. If you do them, you're bad. Because drugs are bad, okay? It's a bad thing to do drugs, so don't be bad.
But the show doesn't shy away from depicting how Charlie finds solace and elation when he is high. It takes him away from himself. Who needs to deal with emotional scars and past traumas when you can simply numb yourself to it all and live in a moment of chemically altered bliss? So I don't sit in judgment of Charlie from a place up on high. I can understand the character and certainly empathise with his addiction plight. I'm aware that there is a criticism that almost all of Charlie's arc for the first 2 seasons revolve around kicking his heroin habit, but as I've mentioned previously when viewing the overly emotional swerves of Jack, we always have to keep in mind the compressed time frame that the first 3 seasons take place within. Charlie is only just cleaning up his act in this episode by going cold turkey, which leaves a void at the centre of his life, and for so many years his entire existence revolved around getting high or looking to get high, and not dealing with anything else. The heroin was a crutch, and over the next several weeks on the island he is still dealing with the loss of that crutch and reckoning with that void within himself. And Charlie's addictive personality finds a new crutch to hold on to, and a new obsession to fill that void with. We will tackle Charlie and Claire's chaste yet contentious relationship and his possessiveness over Aaron in more depth as we go along. It does make sense that he latches onto the innocence of a new mother and her newborn baby because he is trying to get that innocence back for himself and achieve a state of grace, although that won't be an excuse for some of his smothering behaviours.
Well, he's going to need feeding now. He's going to be up all night and fussy all day.
Sorry.
Alright, well, there's no harm done. Give him here then.
Perhaps it's fair to say that Charlie sees himself as being more important than he really is, mostly due to his years of rock star fame and celebrity, and his desperate need to cling on to relevance and status. Yet he is constantly challenged and confounded by the fact that he isn't the main character in every single one of his episodes. It's not all about him, but he does try to make it about him, and this was something that didn't endear me to some of his more extreme actions later on. However, his final arc in Season 3, involving Desmond's flashes of his death, will redeem both the actor and the character in a major way, at least in my eyes. I cannot think of any fan, even the Charlie haters, who dislike Greatest Hits, which isn't just the best Charlie episode, it's one of the best episodes from the entire series. So the redemption still awaits. It's just the journey between those 2 points where things get a little choppy, and I will get into the problems of Charlie in more detail in his next-centric episode, Homecoming. I know I've been crapping on him from great heights in this review so far, but I actually quite like Charlie in this episode, despite the fact that he causes the cave-in simply because his pride has been wounded and he wants to project his frustrations onto Jack. To me, it's forgivable because he is in the throes of going cold turkey and suffering from withdrawal symptoms in a way that will affect his judgment. He won't always have this excuse, however. Sober Charlie will eventually try everyone's patience on the island to some extent. Even characters like Locke and Hurley have their fallings out with him, and they are fairly accepting of his many flaws. The dark Charlie arc of Season 2 will represent the lowest point for the character, and for us, the audience. But The Moth provides us with a simple island tale about a drug addict trying to get clean, whilst the other survivors deal with a cave-in that he caused. A cave-in that has trapped their shiny new leader in the rubble. These present-day events form a satisfying narrative through line that I think is very well structured. Charlie's struggle has some genuine pathos to it, especially in his scenes with Locke, which we will discuss in more detail in a moment. However, I feel less positive about the flashbacks, which chart how this innocent Catholic boy turned into a heroin-addicted rock star. The episode essentially gives us the cliff notes of Charlie's rise and fall story, with a rather melodramatic series of scenes that portray his brother Liam as a total poison pill. Neil Hopkins' performance is limited by the way the character is written, since there isn't a lot of depth there beyond him being selfish and egocentric. He isn't written with the same nuance that we will later see demonstrated with similar flashback antagonists like Christian Shepherd. Another thing that bothers me about Charlie and Liam's scenes together is Hopkins' English accent. It is ear-bleedingly horrible, mate.
Chill, baby brother.
Not quite Dick Van Dyke bad, but it's a lip-smacking distraction, and I have a visceral reaction to it in the same way that Australian fans have a visceral reaction to some of the really dodgy Australian accents in the series. These are the first flashbacks from the show that I feel are a little bit weak and fall flat dramatically. They get across the bullet points of the backstory without really scratching beneath the surface of the characters and situations, or even taking unexpected subversive turns like we saw in previous episodes. You can literally predict where the flashbacks are going from pretty much the first scene. And poor Charlie would be saddled with underwhelming flashback storylines for almost his entire run in the show, with the exception of his last centric episode as previously mentioned. Elsewhere, one of the secondary plots on the island sees Michael lead the castaways in digging out Jack from the rubble of the cave-in what amounts to be a rather tension-free series of scenes, since we know that at this stage in the game, there is very little chance that the show is going to kill off one of its major leads, and certainly not a man who was crowned leader only a mere 2 episodes prior. As a matter of fact, there is a distinct lack of legitimate jeopardy in these early episodes in general. Many of the scenarios our characters find themselves in are very much the result of a writer's room think tank who were trying their level best to create drama every week on the island without making it too overtly genre or too reliant upon serialization, which means contrivances like cave-ins and mysterious briefcases and raft burnings and suspicious poisonings will become a regular feature in Season 1 in order to create self-contained dramatic situations which can be both established, then resolved, inside a single episode. And the chances of any long-term consequences to our fresh-faced cast are highly unlikely to last beyond that episode. This is the honeymoon period, the calm before the storm, and Lost has yet to establish its ruthless streak in how it deals with consequences, which we won't see upended until Claire is kidnapped into the jungle and Boone takes a rather tragic fall. The serialization of consequences is on the horizon, and soon there will be no more time for problems such as Shannon having an asthma attack and needing an inhaler, which we'll get into in the next episode guide. One of the main serialised elements that has so far been established and continued across this first half of the season is the mystery of the Frenchwoman's signal, and that plot point forms our other, far more effective story thread in this episode. Saeed hatches a plan to position 3 antennas at different locations, so he can triangulate the source of the Frenchwoman's distress call. There is a clever little caveat that the writers throw in to give the plan some dramatic stakes by making it all dependent upon the antennas being turned on at the exact same time. Of course, the plan doesn't go to, well, plan, and 2 substitutes have to take over from the original volunteers. Shannon proves herself to be surprisingly reliable when entrusted with some responsibility by her biggest critic, Boone, who rushes off to help with the cave-in disaster, and Kate finds herself unable to play nice with Sawyer, and their prickly interaction causes her to abandon her post rather carelessly. What this moment does is help to highlight that she has already developed feelings for Jack, and that Sawyer has already developed a soft spot for her, and we see him momentarily hurt by Kate's bruising dismissal of him, and he is eager to try to hurt her back.
You're actually comparing yourself to Jack.
The difference between us ain't that big, sweetheart. I guarantee you if he had survived a few more weeks on this island, you'd have figured that out.
It's a really good scene that foreshadows a lot of drama to come. As is typical with Lost, an initial plan that the survivors have made is frustrated in various unforeseen ways, then looks set to work out just before being subverted at the very end. In this case, the plan with the antennas manages to pay off despite the game of musical chairs. Saeed now has what he needs to triangulate the signal, only to get knocked out by a mystery assailant at the last minute. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. The meat of this episode is wisely structured around the Charlie and Locke dynamic. Locke takes on the role of a spiritual and moral guardian, resembling somewhat of a biblical figure testing the resolve and faith of someone who wants to believe. This is the second time we see Locke taking on this paternalistic role of a mentor or a teacher following his exchange with Jack in White Rabbit. He is trying to help his fellow survivors see that the island is a place where miracles happen, and that they too can be transformed as he was, but he also intrinsically understands that their transformation must flow from choice. You cannot force change, and especially not in addicts. It must come from within in order for it to last and be meaningful. I love the whole dynamic that these two men share here. Locke knows something about obsession and suffering, and Charlie senses a kindred spirit in him and a willingness to trust that Locke knows what he's doing. At the end of the episode, when they are standing by the fire and Charlie chooses to burn the heroin rather than relying on circumstances to make the choice for him, and Locke beams with fatherly pride.
I'm proud of you, Charlie. Always knew you could do it.
While Michael Giacchino's Charlie theme plays over the scene, subtly underscoring notes of tragedy and hope. It's scenes like this that really made me fall in love with Lost and the characters. Even the character whom I find the most annoying and frustrating has these great dramatic moments of conflict and change, then transformation. The Moth is a perfect metaphor.
Where are you?
Who knocked out Saeed?
You were hit from behind, knocked unconscious. When you woke up, the transceiver, your equipment was destroyed. That was me.
So it turns out to be Locke, which makes sense in terms of his character, and it won't be the last time he tries to stop his fellow survivors from triangulating a signal. More on this in a bit. I always wondered if the writers left this particular mystery open for most of the season, so it could be someone else. If not Russo, maybe the first sign of the others. Because this revelation that Locke was responsible does beg the question, when exactly did he have time to go knock out Saeed when he was so closely aligned with Charlie's story in this episode? He is shown capturing, skinning, and preparing the boar across the day, so it does require some geographical gymnastics in terms of tracking Locke's movements between what we see on screen with Charlie's visits and the journey he had to make off-screen in order to blindside Saeed. First of all, we have to assume that somehow Locke found out about the mission with the antennas. Once aware of this plan, Locke uses his tracking abilities to follow Saeed to his location, 2 kilometers away from base camp, and decides to intervene when the signal is successfully triangulated. He destroys the equipment, then returns to the caves to cook the boar for his new castaway family. But this all leads us to another question. Why would Locke do this? As established later in the series, Locke does not want to leave the island. He is scared that if he does, he might lose his miracle and be returned to that wheelchair and his lonely, unremarkable life. Whereas here on the island, he can live as the hunter he always dreamed of being, a man who others need and revere, someone of consequence. So his motivations are selfish in that way, yet also understandable. Rescue is actually a threat to Locke, although he dresses up his fear as being more altruistic. He tells Saeed that triangulating the distress call would lead the group into danger, because Russo's message claims that something killed her team. Everybody assumes that the "it" she speaks of means the monster. Yet, Locke isn't scared of the monster, especially not at this point. He thinks the monster is the soul of the island, the entity that might even be responsible for his miracle. He also deeply believes that each one of them was brought here for a specific purpose, that they are all part of a grander plan. To leave this place would be to leave without answers. To get so close to discovering the meaning of your existence, your purpose in life, only to then turn your back on it at the last minute and never find out the truth. That is just not something that Locke can bring himself to do. So I don't actually believe the reasoning he gives to Saeed, and as we see later, Locke always finds some reason to destroy or impede the chances of rescue or escape. He blows up the flame station, which is full of equipment capable of communicating with the outside world. He blows up the submarine in order to immobilise everyone. He kills Naomi in an attempt to stop her from making contact with the freighter, and he leads a portion of them to the barracks to hide from their alleged rescuers. And he follows instructions to move the island, effectively jumping it to the other side of the planet so it will not be easily found again. So, knocking out Saeed is internally consistent with Locke's motivations and beliefs. He is willing to do whatever it takes to make sure everyone stays right where they are. The on-island journey that Charlie takes in this episode is emblematic of the larger themes of the show. A character wrestling with their inner darkness in an attempt to reach the light, and how their past suffering informs many of their present-day choices. It's notable that Charlie is often drawn to spiritual figures on the island. First, there is his rather profound relationship with John Locke that helps him on the path to recovery. But when that trust is broken and their relationship sours, Charlie turns to Mr. Echo, a man claiming to be an actual Catholic priest. Like Charlie, Echo is not long for this world, and his death and Locke's departure leave Charlie without any form of real guidance. Enter Desmond. He himself is a man of faith in his own way, and not just because he's a former monk. Desmond believes in God, fate, karmic punishment, and the power of the island, but approaches it all in a much more grounded way. His visions of Charlie's various deaths in Season 3 represent something deeply existential and spiritual to both men. That Desmond is connected to a higher power, and that Charlie has been selected by that higher power to perish, and that his fate is inescapable, which leads Charlie to the ultimate test of faith: self-sacrifice. Quite the biblical notion, one could argue. This was one of the great consistencies with the Charlie character and his arc. He was always reaching for a state of grace, with a little help from the three spiritual figures in his life. John Locke's monologue about the moth in the cocoon is one of my favourite pieces of dialogue from the entire series, and the scene is representative of the core philosophy of the show. Charlie may be the moth in question in this metaphor, but what Locke is saying applies to all of the characters at different points in their lives, and it also translates well to us, the audience, too. We all can relate to the struggle of change.
This moth's just about to emerge. It's in there right now, struggling. It's digging its way through the thick hide of the cocoon. Now, I could help it. Take my knife, gently widen the opening, and the moth would be free. But it would be too weak to survive. The struggle is nature's way of strengthening it.
The key line in this monologue is, "Struggle is nature's way of strengthening it," which is something I imagine Locke has told himself his whole life because he has to believe that. But, like many of his mantras and beliefs, there is a kernel of universal truth there, one that Jacob would very much agree with, I'm sure. The island is where the most critical struggle for humanity and existence has been playing out for centuries. Jacob and the Man in Black are engaged in this existential game, which at its core is all about the binary struggle between the light and the darkness, the past and the future, and the living and the dead. Will the people that come to the island struggle and change for the better, let go of the past and move towards the light? Or will they allow their past sins to define them, thereby succumbing to the darkness? Now, Jacob could help them. He could step in and tell them what they need to do to become better people. Tell them exactly how to defeat the Man in Black and avoid his schemes and manipulations. Jacob could make their whole experience on the island easier this way, but they wouldn't find their own path to peace, or redemption, or self-actualization. They would, in effect, be too weak to survive. It would negate the point of the human experience, and it would defeat the whole purpose of struggling for change. Moths need to leave the cocoon in their own time, when they are ready. Other themes explored in this episode include the core theme of faith, in this case religious belief, which is a little different to Locke's non-denominational faith. Catholicism has an entire history and mythology connected to it, with an emphasis placed on notions of guilt, forgiveness, and absolution. Catholics believe that you can be forgiven for your sins as long as you are truly sorry and give yourself to God. There are references to the Catholic faith throughout this series, whether we are talking more broadly about characters wrestling with their past sins. In Charlie's case, he views them as literal sins that he seeks absolution for. Mr. Echo's entire arc is deeply entwined with Catholicism, as well as the drug trade. He was the man trafficking and smuggling heroin to get it out of his country and into another. Then he went on to sit on the priest's side of the confession box, and this makes for an interesting companion piece to Charlie's backstory, because Charlie is sitting on the other side of the confession box, and he is also on the other side of the heroin trade, as one of the end users whose life is destroyed as a result of that use. These two men from the different sides of the looking glass finally meet on the island and manage to find a mutual redemption. Other Catholic-related themes include the concept of resurrection, which could apply to several characters throughout the story who were once presumed dead and then somehow come back from the dead, whether they be actual ghosts or simply people who fall under near-death experiences. And then there is, of course, John Locke's resurrection in Season 5, even though that turns out to ultimately be a false resurrection. We will once again see that touched upon in Season 6 when Saeed comes back from the dead.
What happened?
This episode and many Charlie episodes explore the nature of temptation, the temptation of recommitting the sins from the past or repeating old patterns of behaviour, as we see with Charlie and the Virgin Mary statues. Temptation is a concept eventually embodied literally by the Man in Black, who tempts characters into darkness by various means of manipulation, a promise to give you what you want in exchange for your soul. I think Charlie's story is mostly representative of addiction and the battles that many people have with self-destructive impulses. What I appreciate about Lost's portrayal of addiction is that the road to recovery is messy. Just because you burned your last few rocks of heroin on a fire in the first week doesn't mean you won't struggle with that decision several weeks later. We will see another portrait of addiction painted for us with Jack's backstory and later in his flash-forward arc. Christian Shepherd was an alcoholic, and Jack eventually followed in his father's footsteps, trying his best to deal with his anguish, depression and guilt by suppressing it all with booze and pills. I have seen some people make the assertion that Desmond was an addict too, due to the amount we see him drinking in his flashbacks, but how can I put this? He's from Scotland.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Now, I'm allowed to make this joke because my wife is Scottish. Circling back to Saeed getting knocked out by a mysterious assailant, this is one of the first truly memorable instances of a character being knocked out on the show, and as we will see, characters getting hit on the head and instantly collapsing to the dirt and passing out is a regular feature of Lost.
What's this? What?
Now, this became one of the longest running minor complaints of the series. Receiving a blow to the head that causes a person to lose consciousness is almost certainly likely to result in a serious concussion. In some cases, brain bleeds or brain damage can be associated with hard hits to the head in real life. Ben would surely be a vegetable by Season 6. Okay, this is fiction, and we have to suspend our disbelief with things like this. To be honest, I don't have an issue with the trope in and of itself. For me, it's more about laziness in how often it's used. For decades, both films and TV shows have deployed this trick. You'll usually see it when the writer wants to move a character from A to B and transition from one scene to another. The easiest way to do that is for someone to get knocked out, then cut to black, and have the character wake up again. However, sometimes it's a writerly solution for when they simply don't know how to resolve a conflict between characters, or need to put the brakes on this particular situation. So the easiest solution is that someone gets knocked out, and when they wake up they will either be in a new location, or the person they had the conflict with is now gone. It's a cliche that's been around forever. Basically, it's a way to get out of certain scenes without resolving anything, and this is something Lost does a lot. I think you can do it a few times across 6 years, but after a while it starts to feel lazy, especially when there are seldom ever any physical consequences to the head blow. I'm going to flag some of the tropes of Lost as we go through the show. There are quite a few to cover, and I'll bring them up whenever we hit upon them. Let me know if you've got any specific ones that come to mind in the comments. Driveshaft's one-hit wonder song You All Everybody is heard for the first time as a performed song, and it is every bit as awful as one might expect from a TV show's fictional attempt at making a hit pop song. I mean, it does sound like something that could have been a one-hit wonder in the 1990s for sure, so in that sense it's a success.
I've seen enough.
Now, some claim that the final song bears resemblance to Rock and Roll Star by Oasis, which was the real Mancunian Brit pop band who served as the model for Driveshaft, and most obviously the template for Charlie and Liam's brotherly relationship and sibling rivalry. And while this type of relationship never becomes an overt thematic focus of the series, there are some significant ones that come up beyond the tragic arc of the Pace brothers. First of all, there's the revelation that Jack and Claire are half-siblings. Now, this is one of the show's less successful attempts to appropriate something from the Star Wars mythos, in this case the Luke and Leia twist. It's something that gets teased out across multiple seasons, yet never quite sticks the landing with it in Season 6 once everyone knows the score, since Jack and Claire get all but a couple of scenes together to address their parentage. There was so much build-up that I always wanted more payoff from that plotline. Otherwise, when you think of siblings or brothers on Lost, whose mind does not immediately go to Jacob and the Man in Black? Perhaps the most dramatic sibling rivalry of all time, spanning millennia and destroying many, many lives. Their whole conflict informs the entire backstory of the island and the reason as to why our characters end up there in the first place. It makes you wonder if Jacob selected Charlie as a candidate due to Charlie's history with Liam. After all, Charlie worshipped his brother at first, then ultimately felt betrayed by him as they wrestled for power and control over the future of their band. Liam's darkness eventually infected Charlie and transformed them both into addicts. Perhaps Jacob saw some of his own pain and strife in these aspects of Charlie's life. It does rub some salt into the wound that Liam found his way back to normality and sobriety, building a new family for himself in Australia, while Charlie was still struggling and drowning in a sea of substance abuse and failure, which all stemmed from Liam's influence in the beginning. Charlie found himself unable to let go of the past, and it was about to pull him under the waves. So I like to believe that Jacob chose Charlie because he was reminded of his own sibling rivalry with the Man in Black, and that by bringing Charlie to the island it would give the rock star a chance to kick his habits, create a new family of his own, and achieve the absolution he had so desperately sought after for so long. A quick check of our number count sees 3 number mentions in this episode, and they all revolve around the same number, the number 8. In the flashbacks, Charlie explains to Liam that he is planning an 8-week tour for Driveshaft, which is a tour that Charlie would sadly never get the chance to participate in. Michael tells his fellow castaways that he worked in construction for 8 years. It seems like a throwaway line in this episode, but this skill set will become more relevant when he decides to build the raft later in the season. There is a conversation between Jack and Kate in which she reminds him that they crashed 8 days ago, which is a reminder to us that all of the episodes thus far have taken place within a 24-hour period, with each episode covering roughly a day of survival. This format will change up in the second half of the season as we start taking some time jumps. And that's your lot. Join me next time when we cover Confidence Man and take a deep dive into the psyche of Sawyer, undoubtedly one of the most popular characters on the show, who started out as one of its most hated. Please like, share and subscribe to keep this channel alive. Consider donating to the Patreon if you'd like to see me make more videos just like this one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back on the island.
No.